What's today is the 30th of August, 2022, and we're having a chat today about Jonathan Hassall, the third born of Roland and Elizabeth. And I'm just going to share my screen and introduce the Hassall Family History Association in brief. I'll just get a share screen going here. Hopefully it's this one here. So, and now I just get a slideshow going. And I have to change that to there. Now I'm getting a different thing to what you're getting, so let's see.
A small version.
Yes, but I'm going to stop that. This is this Zoom business because it wasn't giving. It's giving me the PowerPoint, but it didn't. It for some reason didn't to share throw to. That's better. That's it. You can see it now, can't you?
Well, I had that before. But that's not fine.
I didn't. I keep on dropping out. Okay, so now, but that's not the slideshow, is it? That's if I do from the slideshow. Are you getting a slideshow or are you getting a notes page?
It's showing slideshow, and
not the notes page. Excellent.
On the left-hand side, there's a column, with little pictures in it of what you could show in the main frame.
How about that?
Well, that's
the main.
That's full screen.
That's what I'm after, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. So for those who haven't sort of heard much about the association, it was formed before the bicentenary of 1998 and is to foster research on the life and heritage of Roland and Elizabeth Hassall and their descendants, but not just the Hassall family as such, but the many families that they're associated with. As we know, the association is focused on the lives of Roland and Elizabeth and their children. They had 9 children, 8 of whom lived to maturity. And unfortunately, the 9th child, Elizabeth, died as an infant, drowned at the age of 2, very tragically. But that left 8 children, all of whom married and had children. And so we can see that by the 3rd generation of this family, there were some 62 grandchildren for Roland and Elizabeth based on their 8 children's marriages. Wow. And 50 spouses in that as well, not all of them married. And tonight we're going to focus on Jonathan Hassall and Mary Rouse, 8 children, some of whom died as infants. And this is one of 8 meetings of this type. People are welcome to go to each and every one of them, but the idea is to encourage family members to come online and get connected to each other. We have 4 projects in the association, and one we call Hassall Heritage. And in that project, we try to identify sites, historical sites, whether there's any physical evidence of that site remaining or whether it's something that's just in the history books. The point is that we want to know what sites were associated with these family members and also where they're buried so that we can pay attention to the condition of their gravesite if we get a chance. We may come back to the slide because this shows some of the key points of land and life of Jonathan and Mary as taken from the Jean Stewart book. We have that growing knowledge for each of the children. I show this slide because we often think of, well, a lot of literature just talks about Roland and Elizabeth in Tahiti, LMS missionaries to Tahiti, which was certainly the impetus in coming to this part of the world. But they had Roland was 28 years in England and Elizabeth 30 years, slightly older. Before they went to Tahiti, to the South Pacific. But after that, of course, they had an extended period of time in New South Wales, in Parramatta. And that's where their family grew up. So that's where the substance of their home life and their commercial life took place. And in fact, today I was reading about this site. There's an archaeological project that looked at George Street prior to the building of the large building that's there at the moment. And this is the house that Roland built in about 1804, and the children grew up in this house. Well, I won't go into the detail of that land, but it's interesting that he bought land from a number of landholders around him, and that's how this site grew in size. But let's get back to this family and this quick review before we hand over to Jonathan, to John, to talk about Jonathan. This chart shows the dates of birth of the children, the first two sons born in Coventry. And of course, Jonathan has the distinction of being born in Tahiti shortly before the flight to Sydney. And probably in a sense, part of the reason for the flight to Sydney was the safety of the children and the newborn. So we're going to be talking a bit about Jonathan. Roland passed in 1820, the age of 52, and Elizabeth passed in 1834 at the age of 66. And their children married in the famous triple wedding in 1819, shortly before Roland passed, and that included Jonathan's marriage to Mary Rouse. And the remaining children got married after the passing of Roland. And the grandchildren, well, before I get to that, there's an interesting way to understand the lives of the 8 children, that 4 of them, 5 of them, in fact, passed away before the age of 40. That included Jonathan. And then the other 4 lived riper old ages, James 60 up to Susanna at 84. There's sort of 2 groups of the siblings there. Now, the grandchildren, I won't go through this in detail, but just to point out that after the passing of Roland, the grandchildren started to emerge from remember, there was about 62 in the end. And so you can see that Elizabeth had a very busy time as a matriarch of the family. All of those grandchildren were born before her passing. And then there were a number of grandchildren born after both of the grandparents had passed away. It was interesting to look at, so ignore the yellow, because that's from one of the other of the children. But the last of the grandchildren of Roland and Elizabeth passed away in 1942. And we understand that the grandchildren of those of George are still living. Second project that we have is research and publication. I don't have everything on screen here, but we certainly have the efforts in the past to put together materials and publish them. And we have a newsletter as well, as most people know. And that research and publication project also looks into historical records and academic theses that are now emerging. And it also looks at portraits where we can find some visual imagery of these ancestors of ours. It's slowly emerging. The Hassall Heritage Project that I've referred to, looking at grave sites and their condition. This is the site of George Street, where there's a now large building, but this little presentation here gives a timeline back from sort of early Indigenous times through to simpler times, and includes reference to the Hassalls on that site. The third project we have is genealogy, where we put together the details of people's lives. There's about 5,000 names in that file, and that is growing, and we want that to grow further. And the fourth project is transcription, which is the Hassall family papers in the State Library that we are slowly but systematically working through to transcribe so that they're much more available to people. And there's many more collections in the State Library of New South Wales that have material pertinent to Hassall history, at least 86 additional collections to be explored. Now, one of the reasons we're having these Zoom meetings is to bring people together, to let everybody know that we've got this program in May of 2023 that we're going to gather once again in Parramatta and south of Sydney at the Thomas Hassall School. just to get together and learn a bit more about our family history. We're calling it Build Your History, Know Your Hassalls. So that's a little bit of an overview of the interesting family that we're part of here. And John Brooks is a descendant of Jonathan. And so we've invited him tonight to come online and hopefully bring some family with him as well. John, not too many of the family turned up, but you're here. And others know about Jonathan and are interested to learn more. So I'm just going to hand over to you now for your thoughts on how to proceed with learning more about Jonathan and Mary's life, and tell us, what we need to know, what's interesting. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Graham. Are you going to share screen, or how do we get onto that?
Would you like to, have you got something?
No, it's all right. I'm just seeing bits of you. Never mind. Let's start by identifying me. I'm directly descended from Jonathan. He was my great-great-grandfather. Grandfather was Richard, one of his. My grandfather was Jonathan Evans Hassall. And my mother was Jean Evans Brooks, née Hassall. And I noticed in the book, it describes my father as George Patrick Brooks with one T. No, there was two T's. One T is church, two T's is chapel. There's interesting divisions there. But I grew up as an son of an itinerant engineer around New South Wales and Queensland. But and so I'm a bit of a stateless Australian, including having lived in New Zealand and other places. But as an engineer, you don't spend a lot of time looking at history, but since retired, I've become more interested, and I'm treasurer of the City of Sydney Historical Association, where my wife's president. So we've got a lot now involved in this. And I'd like to take you through some of the work I've found with Jonathan, and have a look at Jonathan's brood, because there's some interesting and occasionally some fairly weird stuff in there that you may well be aware of. He died, supposedly, as far as they know, suicidal after some unsuccessful ventures with farming and a ship, a joint enterprise with one of his brothers-in-laws. But when he died, his wife, Mary, fortunately, was the daughter of Richard Rouse, who was the superintendent of works for the governor, and so could build her a house to accommodate the children, 8 children, although only 6 survived. And that house is Rouse Hill Farm, which is an historic house in New South Wales. And Rouse Hill is a very important part of New South Wales history, the scene of the Battle of Vinegar Hill and other sorts of things like that. But he had, of the 6 children, let me just run quickly through those that I know about from looking. The first of those was Roland Hassall, and he's recognised as a pioneer of the Braidwood district. But he turned to horse breeding, and with Tom Roberts, they owned Archer, that won the first 2 Melbourne Cups. Except they weren't cups then; they were a gold watch. But there was some internal friction with the family, because Archer was foaled on Thomas Royd's cattle farm, owned by Hassall. Royd's died, and 2 years later, Roland Hassall married his widow, and under the rules of the game there, he became the owner of all her assets. With her brother, Tom Roberts, he started selling off all the horses, and then